All right, everyone. We're ready to hear from Chelsea Robben from our presenting sponsor, NextEra. I'll turn it over to her and Dan.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Hello, everyone. Nice to see still a crowd full of folks here. I know it's been a long day. I hope it's been super stimulating and that you're as excited as I am about the conversation that we've had. We have a tall order. We have 20 minutes to cover a lot of ground, and we know that dinner's on the backside of this, so we're going to try to keep it lively and make it worth your while that you're here. So I'm really excited. I'm Dan Vermeer. I'm a professor at Fuqua School of Business and one of the co-chairs with Katie Cross for ClimateCAP. So we're super excited to be here and see this organization flourish, and so much great talent and energy in the room. So, and I'm really excited that I'm able to share the stage today with Chelsea Robben, who is with NextEra Energy. Many of you, I'm sure, are very aware of the work that NextEra does, and we have a chance to dig in a bit to their business model and understand a bit about the kind of work that Chelsea does. So, Chelsea, I just would love to have you give us a little bit of your own background, what led you to NextEra and the kind of work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dan. So Chelsea Robben, thank you guys so much. I think this is a terrific event. I was able to meet many of you this morning at the coffee chat breakout, so I know I'm standing in between you and dinner, but I do appreciate it and hope I can share some value here with you today. So I joined NextEra about 6 years ago in their renewable development team. Most of you may wonder what is Origination, so it's a fancy word for sales. So my team is largely responsible for selling our large-scale wind, solar storage projects, partnering with our corporates, our industrial customers, our utility customers, and really trying to bring value for our customers, and as we all navigate this energy transition together. So prior to joining NextEra, I actually worked very closely. I was a customer of NextEra. I worked very closely with their leadership team for their power marketing group. And so what is power marketing? That's energy trading. So that's how I really got started in the energy business. I didn't know what a megawatt hour was, but I joined this trade floor. Finance is my background, and it was fascinating. And so I quickly got up to speed on what a megawatt means, help bring on some of the last coal units actually on the U.S. grid, and then quickly started understanding what renewables were, what how all of that pairs together with natural gas, and understood what it meant to have a holistic portfolio and how utilities really think and work. So my background in power marketing helped me understand how generation projects interact with the grid. And I was able to understand transmission and why that's important to the work that we're doing today. So when I joined NextEra and really dug into the renewable energy side of the business, that was fascinating for me because we have really complex problems to solve, and it's been a real joy solving those problems.
Great. A lot of people know about NextEra, but they don't necessarily know how NextEra is put together, the different sides of the business. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how the business is put together, how the regulated side works versus the competitive, and how you sort of organize yourself in terms of the structure of the business.
Absolutely. So NextEra Energy Resources is really comprised of two platforms, two sister companies. You've got first, the regulated utility, which is great. It's the U.S.'s largest electric utility. We serve about 6 million accounts, roughly 12 million customers in the state of Florida with a large, clean, affordable, reliable portfolio of generation. And then you have our competitive clean energy business. So that's NextEra Energy Resources. That's the team that I'm a part of. So that's what we call the deregulated part of the business. And so certainly the growth engine of the company is the renewable development organization that I'm a part of. But we have many companies that are comprised in energy resources. You've got energy trading, we've got a mobility team. So we're really on the edges too, trying to think through the transition and making sure that we have holistic companies to help us continue to emerge as the leader. So today we have over 50,000 megawatts in operation, and together with our affiliate of Florida Power and Light and Energy Resources, we're the world's largest developer and owner-operator of wind and solar in the world, and a leader in battery storage.
So we talked a little bit before we came in about the kind of the shift in your customer base. Tell us a little bit about who you sell to and what those conversations are like and how that customer base is evolving.
Absolutely. So that's been the fascinating part of my role and what I really enjoy, because the diversity in our customer base has greatly increased in a very short period of time. So my background, I'm very used to working with utilities, and that's what I was accustomed to. When I joined NextEra, I think one of the interesting things that I learned was just the amount of corporate demand, and that was before it had even really sort of expanded to what we're seeing today. So when I joined, I would say probably 5-10% of our procurement was represented by commercial, what we call commercial industrial customers. Since then, I would say roughly 40% of the demand of the procurement is coming from the commercial and industrial segment. So obviously, you've had the large tech companies that have been leading for over a decade now, with the Amazon, Microsofts of the industry, but now we're starting to see new entrants. I was telling Dan earlier, we've worked with several hospital systems. There was a climate health pledge signed by many healthcare systems 2 years ago. So that's been very interesting. I think a data point that's interesting, and we've really had to think through as an organization, how do we form our teams to go and serve these new markets, because it's also very different for our teams. But in 2020, I think that's where we started to see more of an inflection point. At that point in time, you had roughly 700 companies that had publicly stated ESG goals. Going from 2020 to 2022, that number increased to 1,200 companies. And then just in a year, going from 22 to 23, that number jumped up to over 3,000 companies with publicly stated goals. So I think Caitlin from Amazon, I was watching her panel, and she asked a key question: are they needed for the transition? And the answer that I told her was emphatically yes. We have to partner and do this together. And I think it's going to take combined offtake of different customers to really transition this economy.
So I know a lot of our students are interested in how does the finance actually get structured for these deals? Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of range of financing models with these different kinds of customers that help them invest in renewables?
Absolutely. The financing piece of it is extremely important. So NextEra Energy Resources is unique in the fact that because we have the regulated utility, we have such a strong balance sheet. We actually finance these projects on balance sheet, but we do need to recycle the capital for these projects, just for size and scope and scale, for your understanding. If what my team is responsible for, is charged with, is signing, megawatts for each year. So roughly, our target is to accomplish anywhere from 10 gigawatts to 12 gigawatts in a year, which is a mid-sized utility. It's an extraordinarily large number. That's roughly $14 billion of CapEx. So what you have to do is we have to recycle this capital. The last, I would say, prior to the Inflation Reduction Act, which resulted in very accretive federal tax credits that finally gave us a runway. So prior, the last 20 years in renewable energy development and financing, we only had these very short runways, and we always had these cliff periods for investment tax credits and production tax credits. But Inflation Reduction Act gave us this long runway. We could actually build a business for sustainable future. However, with the Inflation Reduction Act, it also created new options or new constraints on financing as well. So prior to the Inflation Reduction Act, we primarily identified that tax equity so we worked closely with really like the big four, big five banks on tax equity financing. We found that to be the most competitive way to finance these large-scale renewable projects. However, with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, we saw the demand for tax equity go from $20 billion annually, which is significant, to $50 billion in just 18 months. So there isn't enough tax appetite to really finance all these projects. So we've had to get creative, but that's really, I really think that that's a skill set, a specialty that NextEra truly demonstrates. We're always trying to find the cheapest cost of financing, and we're able to do it too because we do have our sister company of the rate-regulated utility, and we've always championed a sense of excellence around our financing. So what we've actually seen is a bit of a switch there and trying to think through project finance again, that's important because as the corporates come in, their contracts look very different than, say, a utility buyer. So utility buyer is fine with what we call busbar delivered long-term contracts. Like a solar project has a 35-year asset life. And corporates are fine, or utilities are fine, signing up for projects of that term. That's what they're used to. That's what they've done. As we look at corporates, they have a much shorter window of procurement interest. So we've had to get creative to really enable that market. So the financing around that has been key. So with the Inflation Reduction Act too, though, even though we've seen this sort of cap on tax equity financing, what it enabled was it enabled us to actually transfer the tax credits. And so it's a way for us to also work with our corporates, not for just renewable offtake, but to help them optimize their tax liabilities on an annual basis. So that's something that we've really thought through as we also evaluate project financing to enable these projects.
Something that we didn't talk about before, but I'm just curious about, one of the new features in this landscape is big growth in load that is expected with AI and electric vehicles and a lot of other sources. How does that unexpected and pretty rapid growth in demand translate for you? How does that affect the kind of conversations you're having? I know some of the utilities are now really doubling down on natural gas. I'm just wondering how that's playing out in your conversations.
Excellent question. So first and foremost, my job is to build generation. So the fact that there's load growth and we're seeing utility load growth is very exciting for me, as well as the customers I serve. It's an opportunity for the utilities who over the last decade have seen flat to declining load growth. And you are right, there's significant load growth. A few folks on my team right now are really focused on Georgia, who had a 3 gigawatt procurement, their largest procurement to date for renewable energy. And it's truly to meet the corporate demand that they're seeing. We're seeing significant data center growth, right? So they're looking to procure renewables and tariff those renewables to their corporate customers. So it is exciting. We are seeing a need, especially in the southeastern markets, for capacity. So yes, there is some discussion on can gas meet that. We do believe that you can pair these solutions together because you're going to need to pair different fuel technology solutions together to really transition. It's also a fantastic opportunity for battery energy storage. And so that's what we're taking a look at, and we're seeing significant demand in battery energy storage. I'll give you an example. As you look at power prices across the grid, and it's really regional, because depending on what region you are in is dependent on what fuel source is the most economic. So if you look at the central part of the US, there's really great wind quality, and wind is some of the most economic generation that you can buy. And so we are seeing a lot of data centers flock to that region to take advantage of the cheap energy that wind provides. And so now they're looking for, but because their demand growth is far exceeding that of what the utility expected, what we're doing now is we're pairing storage at those wind facilities to enable those data centers to come on much faster. It's been a unique and extremely competitive position for us because we've had these existing wind farms, existing interconnects, so we're able to relatively quickly build these large battery storage facilities to enable the capacity and enable these data centers to come online.
So there's a lot of organic things that are driving scale and speed, but there's lots of barriers too. So let's click through some of those things that get in the way, that create friction in the system. Transmission. Let's talk about transmission.
Transmission, my favorite topic. So I always tell folks when they join my team, generation's the sexy part of the business, but in order to be successful, you truly have to understand transmission. You have to understand power flows on the system, because ultimately, if you try to put too much generation in one location, it's going to get clogged. It's going to be very, very expensive. I think about transmission as the highway for our electric grid. And ultimately, if you're trying to put 1,000 cars on a 2-lane highway, it's not going to work and it's going to break. So it's critically important for us to be thinking about transmission, thinking about innovative solutions, because our transmission grid was built for centralized generation, coal, nuclear, large gas facilities. Now we have very disparate generation centers closer to load, which is great. So that helps enable some of the generation, but it has been overwhelming for the different, what they call regional transmission organizations, to think through how they can come up with enough innovative transmission projects to really enable the renewables and the intermittent assets that are coming onto the grid. It's one of the things that I'm hyper focused on. We have a transmission team, NextEra Energy Transmission, and so we're really trying to think through greenfield projects. I had some executives from some Southeast utilities with us earlier this week, and they have large goals, but they're trying to think through how do they meet all of that. And if they only go to solar, you got to think, it's just like when you think about investing in stocks, right? You want some diversity, or your financial planning, right? I'm a big believer in combined solutions. What are all the tools that you have in the toolbox? So they're trying to think through that. And we truly believe, and there have been some projects that have been announced, but if you do high voltage DC transmission, that's another creative way for us to transition very low cost, high resource technology in the West and get it closer to the East, where they just simply don't have that access. So it's something that we're thinking about. It's something the RTOs are critically focused on. They just came out with FERC Order 2023, and they're trying to think through how can they get through the queues faster, because it's extremely, it can be prohibitive, for generation to come online. We're seeing an SPP anywhere from 4 to 5 years of being in the queue before we can bring generation online. We're starting to see MISO queues extend out their timelines. I know out in the Western Interconnect, where they have a proliferation of renewables, they can sometimes see upwards of 8 years, and then PJM also has significant constraints in the Mid-Atlantic. So it's an important topic that we as an industry have to solve together.
So there's also barriers around interconnection queues. There's also barriers around permitting. We don't have time to go into those. I'd like to get to the last one, though, which is NIMBYism, or I think the new term is banana, don't build anything anywhere. But that local resistance to having new infrastructure in your backyard is real. There's a political dimension to that as well. So I'm just wondering how you engage local communities in this process. What are your strategies to try to reduce the kind of friction in getting these things built in places with communities that might be ambivalent?
No, it's an excellent question, and it's underpins our entire development organization. It is critically important. While we are a national organization that builds across the North American grid, we are very regionalized, and it is so important because different regions, different communities, different counties, different parishes have very different needs. So it is critically important for us. We have a community outreach team that's just focused on making sure we're making the right connections. It's important for us that if we know that we're acquiring land, in order for there to be success for ultimately a project to come in 4 to 5 to 6 years, that we're making connections on at the very front end of acquiring that land or leasing that land. So that's what we do. We have a development team, we have a community engagement team, we have a tribal relations team, because there's great wind and solar resource in Oklahoma. There's also we need to be working with our communities to understand what they need, right? So it was important for us. We figured it out about, I would say, I would say 7, 8 years ago that we needed a tribal relations team. So kudos to our leadership to make sure that we had the right resources to connect with these communities and understand what they need and broker the right solution at the end of the day. Same with legislators. I mean, it's really important to sort of sit down with them and understand what their constraints are when our competitors are sort of, just placing projects and locations and maybe not not following certain ordinances. We're trying to not do that. So we're trying to be very methodical and set ourselves apart. It's really important to build the right relationships up front. And we've seen our work pay off. I can tell you a very new state that we started developing in just recently is Louisiana, and oil and gas underpins that market. However, we've been very, very thoughtful about going and acknowledging with the different parishes, here's a solar ordinance that you guys should be thinking about, versus not educating them. And I think they've definitely appreciated that, because they had other actors that didn't follow along so well. And we've actually now seen their support. And we're also trying to think through what are ways that we can actually work with your local communities. So we were able to sponsor a few grants and make sure that we were developing technology labs in some of the high schools around where we're also planning to develop projects. Look, I always say when we sign a PPA with a customer, a power purchase agreement, when we develop a project, we're entering into a marriage with our customers. We're entering into a marriage with that local community. So understanding their needs is very important.
As a former anthropologist, I see a lot of opportunities for anthropologists in this space who can understand some of these dynamics. We had a case study from a utility recently, and rather than pay a consultant to go in and map the route of where some of the infrastructure was going in, they put an online map that anyone in the community could come and pin and identify why that specific site was relevant, whether it was a graveyard or a spiritual site. And they had several hundred people post meaningful sites on the route that they now had sort of as input for thinking about how they would actually run the infrastructure through these communities. So I thought that was a super interesting approach to addressing this.
It's very important. We have a team that just before we even have outreach to landowners, we'll do an entire stakeholder mapping so that we truly understand. And if you don't do the work up front, there's high likelihood that you're going to be successful on the back end of this.
Good. Well, I'd like to just finish with a question. What advice would you give to folks who are early stage of their career, looking at this landscape? It's changing really fast. The macro conditions look like there's big opportunities, but sometimes it's hard to know how to enter into that space. Given the kind of the path that you've walked and where you see the industry heading, what advice would you want to give to aspiring professionals in the field?
Thank you, Dan. I can tell you this is a very exciting industry to be in. I'm thankful every single day. In order for economies to thrive, they need energy, they need electricity. And we're gifted with the opportunity to figure out how we're going to do that for the US. So I'm incredibly humbled to be part of this industry and to be required to think innovatively and creatively on how we're going to do that together. So I will admit that when I was in my study process, I was very unfamiliar with the energy industry. I was more or less attracted to it because of the trade floor aspect, and I never thought that one day I'd be, out there developing and contracting large-scale renewable projects for a career. So it's been very interesting. I think that we're at the very early stages of what needs to be done as an industry. So we need all the talent that we can attract to really solve the hard problems, because as we talked about earlier, it's not going to be just building these generation projects. It's going to be thinking about transmission solutions and how we enable that. I can tell you that I've had a very rewarding career, and the problems that we get to solve are very unique every day. So if you're up for a challenge, if you're a person that likes to come in and give it 110% and you demand success at all levels, this is going to be a very interesting industry for you. It's very fast paced, but it's been very rewarding.
Awesome. Chelsea, thanks for a really great conversation. I think we fit in a lot in 20 minutes, and I'd like to have everybody join me.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan.
So thank you guys. I hope you had a great day, and we'll see you all tomorrow.